The mansion sat on a hill overlooking the sprawling, indifferent city of Seattle, a fortress of despair rather than opulence. Its imposing stone walls and vast, manicured gardens hinted at untold wealth, but within a different story unfolded, one of crushing sorrow, suffocating silence, and a love so profound it had become a cage. This was the home of Elias Thorne, a titan of tech whose empire touched every corner of the digital world, yet who found himself utterly powerless in the face of his own tragedy. Elias, a man whose gaze once commanded boardrooms and whose intellect shaped global markets, now moved through his own home with the gait of a ghost. His shoulders, once broad with ambition, were permanently stooped, weighed down by an invisible burden. 7 years. 7 long, agonizing years since the day his world had fractured, leaving him with a fortune that felt like ashes and a heart that felt like stone. His beloved twin daughters, Clara and Elara, were the sun and moon of his existence, but their light had been stolen. Born with a rare, devastating condition, they were, according to every esteemed specialist money could buy, completely blind. Total blindness. The words echoed in Elias's mind like a death knell, a constant, cruel reminder of what had been lost. He had scoured the globe, flown them to clinics in Switzerland, Germany, Japan, each journey fueled by a desperate, dwindling hope, each return trip more crushing than the last. He had spent close to $20 million, a sum that could build small nations, on treatments that promised miracles and delivered only deeper disappointment. The girls, now 7 years old, lived in a world of perpetual twilight, their rooms meticulously designed to prevent any accidental encounters with a world they could not perceive. Heavy, velvet curtains blocked out every sliver of natural light, a misguided attempt to protect their sensitive eyes from what doctors had repeatedly warned would be painful and damaging. Their toys were textured, their books embossed with braille, their days structured around the comforting monotony of routine. They navigated their confined universe with an eerie grace, their small hands mapping the familiar contours of their rooms, their voices, when they spoke, soft and resonant like instruments played in the dark. But underneath the practiced calm, a quiet desperation simmered. Elias saw it in the way Clara, the more outgoing twin, would sometimes tilt her head towards a distant sound, as if straining to catch a glimpse of its source. He saw it in the way Elara, the quieter, more observant sister, would trace the patterns on their blankets with a slow, deliberate finger, as if trying to memorize a picture she could never see. He saw it in their small, trembling smiles when he read them stories, their young faces yearning for the vibrant worlds he described. He remembered the promises of Dr. Alistair Finch, a man hailed as a pioneer in pediatric ophthalmology. Finch, with his silver hair and reassuring demeanor, had been the first to deliver the devastating diagnosis, and the last to offer any glimmer of hope. "Mr. Thorne," he had said, his voice grave, "we have exhausted every avenue. The optic nerves are simply dormant. Any attempt to stimulate them could cause irreparable harm." Elias had clung to those words, believing them to be the ultimate truth, and in doing so, had unwittingly become a jailer to his own children, imprisoning them in a darkness he believed was for their own good. The mansion, once a vibrant hub of parties and laughter, had become a mausoleum of silenced joy. The staff, a small army of housekeepers, chefs, and security personnel, moved with hushed reverence, their voices low, their footsteps muffled. They understood the unspoken rule: do not disturb the stillness, do not disrupt the routine, and above all, do not, under any circumstances, offer false hope about the girl's condition. Hope in this house was a dangerous weapon, capable of inflicting more pain than despair. Even Mrs. Gable, the long-serving head housekeeper, a woman whose stern exterior masked a deep, unarticulated affection for the twins, had succumbed to the prevailing atmosphere. Her once sparkling eyes now held a permanent shadow, a reflection of the family's grief. She ensured the girls' rooms remained in their pristine, light-deprived state, overseeing every detail with a meticulousness born of sorrow and strict adherence to Dr. Finch's directives. Elias spent his evenings in his study, surrounded by the glow of multiple screens, managing his empire, but his focus was fractured. The silence from the girls' wing of the house was a constant hum in his ears, a symphony of what-ifs and might-have-beens. He would sometimes steal down the hallway, listening at their doors, catching snippets of their whispered conversations, their innocent laughter which, despite everything, still held a fragile beauty. He yearned to see them truly see, to witness the world through their eyes, even for a fleeting moment. But that dream, he had been told, was an impossible fantasy. One particularly oppressive evening, as a cold rain lashed against the mansion windows, Elias sat staring at an old photograph. It was taken shortly after the girls were born, a rare moment before the diagnosis, when their tiny eyes, still unfocused, seemed to hold the promise of a future filled with vibrant colors. He traced their small faces with a trembling finger, a tear finally escaping his tightly guarded composure, carving a hot path down his cheek. He had failed them. He had failed to protect them from this darkness. His phone buzzed, a stark intrusion. It was Mrs. Gable. Her voice, usually so composed, held a tremor. "Mr. Thorne," she began, I apologize for disturbing you. But Nanny Elena has suddenly given notice. Her mother is very ill back home. She leaves tonight." Elias felt a pang of annoyance, then a wave of exhaustion. Nanny Elena had been with them for years, a steadfast presence in the girls' lives. Now another disruption. He rubbed his temples. "Very well, Mrs. Gable. Please begin the search for a replacement immediately. And remind them of the rules." The rules. His emphasis on the last word was sharp, almost desperate. Mrs. Gable understood. No hope, no deviation, no challenging the established order. She promised to put out feelers, knowing how difficult it would be to find someone suitable, someone who understood the unique, delicate ecosystem of the Thorne household. Elias hung up, the silence in the room pressing in on him once more. Another nanny. Another temporary fixture in a life that felt permanently broken. He wondered if anyone, truly anyone, could ever understand the depths of his family's sorrow, or the desperate, unspoken longing for a different kind of light. The rain continued its relentless assault, mirroring the storm raging within Elias's heart, a storm that promised no clear skies.
If you are enjoying this story, kindly do us a favor and subscribe to our channel. It is free and won't cost anything, but it means a lot to us. We are just a small channel trying to grow. Thank you. And back to the video.
Outside the mansion's gates, beyond the reach of its despair, a different kind of storm was brewing. A storm of change, carried on the shoulders of a woman named Nia Washington. She knew nothing of Elias Thorne's vast wealth, nor of the silent suffering within his fortress. She only knew that she needed a job, a purpose, a chance to prove that compassion, when combined with careful observation, could sometimes see what others missed. And in the bleak, rain-soaked city, a single flickering flame of hope was about to ignite, unknowingly carried by the very person the House of Silent Whispers would least expect. This was a story about seeing not just with eyes but with the heart, and how sometimes the greatest light comes from the most unexpected places. Nia Washington was not the kind of person who usually applied for jobs in mansions. Her background was in pediatric care support, specifically with children who had sensory processing disorders and low vision challenges. She carried not a polished resume detailing grand university degrees, but a thick, hand-stitched notebook filled with meticulous observations, a testament to years spent learning to listen when others only saw silence. She was tall, with eyes that were thoughtful and steady, and an easy grace that made her movements seem purposeful, never rushed. She wore a simple dark dress and clean, sensible shoes that made no sound on the marble floors of the Thorne mansion's reception area. When the guard directed her to the service entrance, Nia didn't flinch. She simply smiled, a small, knowing curve of the lips, and stated clearly, "I have an interview with Mrs. Gable regarding the children's care." It was a microaggression, a small, cold jab meant to remind her of her place, but Nia knew that true authority was not given by badges or bank accounts. It was earned through competence and conviction. Mrs. Gable, the head housekeeper, was a whirlwind of starch and efficiency. Her silver hair was pinned tight, and her voice was a low, dry rustle of paper. She led Nia through the house, past hallways lined with priceless, muted artwork and heavy, closed doors. "The position is for a housekeeper/care assistant," Mrs. Gable explained, her tone clipped. "But primarily, Miss Washington, you must understand the rules of this house. Children are highly sensitive. Their routine is paramount. and there is absolutely no discussion of their condition with them. It is final. Total blindness. Dr. Finch's directive is not to be questioned. Nia listened, her eyes constantly moving. She didn't look at the oil paintings. She looked at the padded edges of the tables, the strategically placed sound mufflers, and the immense, light-devouring velvet curtains that sealed off every window. The air itself felt thick and stale, preserved in permanent twilight. The children's suffering, she realized, wasn't just in their eyes. It was in the entire atmosphere of the house, a monument to a closed case. When Elias Thorne finally emerged from his study, he was a study in controlled exhaustion. He barely glanced at Nia, his attention fixed on his phone, his mind clearly still navigating the treacherous waters of his business empire. He shook her hand briefly, a perfunctory gesture, and handed her a thick file. "You've been briefed on the condition, Miss Washington?" Elias's voice was deep, laced with the metallic tang of defeat. "The salary is generous. Conditions are simple. Keep the home environment stable. Do not, under any circumstances, try to fix anything. We have spent $20 million being told there is no fix. We are done with false hope." Nia set her notepad down on the table, her gaze finally meeting his, steady, unwavering. "Mr. Thorne, I don't offer promises, and I certainly don't offer false hope. My job, if you hire me, is to observe, record, and ensure a stimulating, safe environment based on the children's needs. I respect the pain this house holds. But I will do my job, and my job requires paying attention." Elias paused, momentarily thrown by her directness, a quality he hadn't encountered from staff in years. Most people tiptoed around him, intimidated by his wealth and his grief. He saw no fear in Nia's eyes, only a quiet, grounded competence. He shrugged, picking up his phone. "Start tomorrow. You can clean their wing first." The statement, simple as it was, held the weight of dismissal, a clear boundary drawn between the help and the heart of the family. That night, in her tiny staff-allocated apartment above the garage, Nia didn't unpack cleaning supplies. She opened her own treasure box, a compact camera for logging evidence, a set of high-contrast black and white cards, and a small, antique clicking toy top. Most importantly, she reviewed the neat, handwritten notes she had compiled years ago while working with low-vision children in a Brooklyn clinic. She wrote one phrase on a clean page: "The light is always there. We just need to find the right crack." The next morning, Nia moved through the girls' wing. The air was heavy, scented faintly with old and used lavender. She found Clara and Elara in the sunless playroom, seated on a thick rug, rocking slightly, a soft, self-soothing rhythm. Nanny Petra, the replacement care worker, a kind but overwhelmed woman, was sitting a few feet away, scrolling through a magazine. "Girls," Petra said, her voice sighing with exhaustion, "if you stop crying, maybe we can play." She didn't look up, too weary to engage the darkness. Nia's heart clenched. This wasn't protection, it was neglect disguised as protocol. The girls weren't being stimulated, they were being placated. Nia, however, adhered to the letter, if not the spirit, of her job title. She picked up a mop and a bucket of water. The sounds of her meticulous cleaning, the clink of the bucket handle, the soft swish of the damp mop on the hardwood floor, cut through the oppressive silence. She didn't speak to the girls, but she changed the rhythm of the room. Clara, the more outward twin, lifted her head. Elara, the quiet one, stopped rocking. Both small faces turned, with a precision that was unnerving, toward the source of the clean, purposeful sounds. Nia knelt down near the doorway, still holding the mop. She whispered, low and calm, "Hello, little listeners. I'm Nia. I'm making this room fresh and ready for play." Clara's voice was barely a breath. Where's Petra?" "She's right here." "But she wants you to help me listen," Nia replied. She dipped the mop back into the bucket, making a slight, measured splash sound, then paused. Clara tapped her fingers on the floor, imitating the rhythm. Elara giggled, a clear, bell-like sound that seemed utterly foreign to the house. The mop was put aside. Nia had already started her work. She began a sound game, moving around the room, lightly tapping different objects: the smooth wood of a chair, the rough weave of the rug, the hollow thud of a bookshelf, asking the girls to identify her location. Their sound localization was excellent, a stark survival skill honed by the silence. When she moved toward the window, obscured by the heavy velvet, Elara leaned forward, her face tilting as if tracking not a sound but a change in the air. Nia felt a spark ignite inside her, a fierce, protective heat. The darkness here was not absolute, it had cracks. And where there were cracks, light could slip in. She knew what she had to do, and she knew it would violate the sacred, fear-driven rules of the house. She stood slowly, moving to the window, the oppressive curtains thick and heavy under her hands. "Girls," she whispered, her voice low and conspiratorial, "I want to try a new sound. It's quiet. If it feels uncomfortable or if you feel scared, you just have to say stop right away. Do you promise me you'll use the word stop if you need to?" Both girls nodded, their tiny heads bobbing, their focus absolute. They had been given a word that restored their control, a concept the doctors had stripped away by forcing painful exams and prescribing perpetual night. With 2 careful fingers, Nia pinched the thick, unyielding fabric and, with agonizing slowness, created a single narrow slit in the center of the heavy curtain. A sliver of Seattle's cold autumnal light, a fragile silver thread, spilled onto the rug lying still and bright. The reaction was immediate. Both girls gasped, a sharp caught breath. Then, both small heads, with uncanny, instinctive coordination, turned precisely toward the luminous line on the carpet. They didn't shield their faces, they stared. "It feels different," Clara murmured, her voice trembling with awe, not pain. "It's warmer." Elara lifted a small hand, stretching her fingers into the light beam. "It's brighter now," she whispered. Nia stepped across the beam, casting a soft, fleeting shadow. "Now darker," Clara answered instantly, her voice now steady. Elara tilted her head as if using her whole face to listen. "It feels like someone walked between me and something." Joy, raw and undeniable, coursed through Nia. It wasn't sight in the conventional sense, but it was functional discrimination, a response to light and shadow. The dormant nerves, the $20 million spent in vain, all of it was being countered by a simple, measured slit in a curtain. But before the moment could fully register, the door swung open. Mrs. Gable stood there, followed by a frowning Petra. "Miss Washington, what is the meaning of this?" "The curtains. You know the doctor's orders." Mrs. Gable's voice was a furious hiss. Clara, hearing the rising tension, piped up, her small voice brave. "It didn't hurt, Mrs. Gable." Miss Nia made a tiny line of light, and we could tell when it was darker. Suddenly, hurried footsteps on the stairs announced the arrival of Elias. He had been close enough to hear the girls' elevated, excited voices and Mrs. Gable's fury. His face, usually an impassive mask, was wide with alarm. "What is happening here? What have you done, Miss Johnson?" His eyes darted from the frantic housekeeper to the silver thread of light on the floor, and finally to his daughters, whose small faces were glowing with a curiosity he hadn't seen in years. Nia remained calm, standing firm in the knowledge of her data. "Mr. Thorne, with the children's consent, I introduced a safe, minimal stimulus, a thin, indirect beam of light. They were able to consistently differentiate between light and shadow. They are not entirely lost to darkness." Elara's voice, stronger now, cut through the tension. "Dad, I can feel when it gets brighter." Elias Thorne stood frozen, the man who controlled empires unable to move. 7 years of accepted truth, 7 years of crushing despair, shattered by 7 simple words spoken by his daughter, words confirmed by a housekeeper he'd barely acknowledged. Tears welled in his eyes, not of sorrow but of a fierce, terrifying hope. He dropped to his knees, his silk tie loosened, kneeling before his twins. "Did it hurt, my loves? Tell me the truth. Did anything hurt?" "No," Michael whispered. "Just different." Elias turned to Nia, his lips trembling. "Do it again. Exactly as before. I need to see." As Nia slowly repeated the action, creating the silver thread of light, and then raising her hand to cast a shadow, Elias covered his mouth, watching the twin faces follow the change, precise and absolute. It was the first time in 7 years he had seen his children react to the world outside their body. Mrs. Gable, rigid with dogma, reached for her phone. "I am calling Dr. Finch." "This is reckless, Mr. Thorne. Light is a danger." "No, Martha." "Enough," Elias said, his voice quiet but commanding, his corporate steel finally returning. He stood, shaking, and looked at Nia. "Thank you, Miss Washington. Thank you for asking the right question." Nia simply nodded, retrieving her phone and notebook. She started recording the next trial, the time, distance, and response meticulously logged. "We go slow, Mr. Thorne. Safe and with data. I will record everything for evidence. We will let science speak." This single slit of light had done more than prove a medical opinion wrong. It had woken the entire house, turning a private tragedy into a profound public challenge to authority. The darkness had been breached, but Nia knew that the far greater storm, the one of professional prejudice, institutional pride, and legal threats, was only just beginning to gather on the horizon. The truth was out, but now they had to fight for the right to believe it. The brief, searing moment of light and the whispered declaration, "Dad, I can feel when it gets brighter," shattered 7 years of entrenched despair, but it also activated the defensive mechanisms of the old world. Hope, when it challenged the powerful, quickly transformed into a threat, and the Thorne mansion was about to learn that professional pride fought harder than any virus. Elias Thorne, jolted from his grief-induced apathy, transformed from a heartbroken father into a methodical CEO demanding answers. He immediately called his chief of staff, tasking them with one goal: secure an independent, uncompromised pediatric ophthalmologist. He ignored the frantic protests of Mrs. Gable, who insisted on following Dr. Finch's rigid protocol, and silenced the calls of Finch's alarmed team. Elias had been sold a narrative of total failure. Now he had evidence of partial success, and he would back it with all the resources at his command. Nia Washington moved through the house with the quiet focus of a scientist preparing a critical experiment. She wasn't triumphant, she was meticulously documenting. Her small camera recorded the twins' light and shadow discrimination trials, short 2-minute clips showing their precise head turns toward the slit of light, followed by their immediate verbal identification of darker when Nia's hand created an occlusion. Her notebook swelled with data, lux estimates, latency of response, emotional state, Clara, curious, Elara, calm, and their use of the safe word stop whenever they felt even a hint of stress. This meticulousness was her armor. She knew that in a system governed by pedigree and prejudice, her credentials, or lack thereof, would be attacked. They would call her a housekeeper, a maid, and dismiss her work as unlicensed experimentation. She had to make the data speak louder than their titles. The first volley from the enemy was swift and brutal. Dr. Finch, upon hearing the news, called Elias, his voice dripping with condescension and professional derision. "Mr. Thorne, you are a brilliant man, but you are not a physician. Allowing domestic staff to interfere with a severe congenital condition is not only reckless, it is potentially traumatizing. Parent videos are anecdotal at best. Cortically blind children exhibit random sensory movements. You are risking serious psychological harm with this false hope." Nia, standing beside Elias during the call, stepped closer to the speakerphone. Her voice was steady, calm, and utterly factual. "Dr. Finch, we've conducted 10 repeated trials with a constant stimulus, and the response is not random. It is repeatable, consistent, and consent-based. You stated the optic nerves were dormant. I refer you to the neonatology notes from 7 years ago, which flagged a possibility of light perception, LP. Why was that LP note discarded in your final reports?" Silence. The metallic ring of the speakerphone filled the gap. Finch, momentarily stunned by the specificity of her counter-argument, quickly regained his footing, his tone turning dark. "If this continues, Miss Johnson, I will notify the State Medical Board and Child Protective Services. This is unlicensed practice, and I will ensure it is halted immediately." He hung up with a sharp click, leaving behind a room that suddenly felt very heavy. The threat was real. Within hours, 2 officials arrived at the mansion, Mark Freeman from the State Medical Board and Dana Lewis from CPS. Freeman, a man whose suit seemed 2 sizes too tight, glanced at Nia's appearance and then spoke directly, respectfully, only to Elias. "Mr. Thorne, we've received a serious complaint regarding unlicensed medical practice and risk to minors." Elias, armed by Nia's preparation, ushered them into the library. But when the officials turned to Nia, the microaggressions resumed. Freeman's tone shifted, hardening as he asked, "Miss Johnson, what exactly are you doing with these children?" Nia didn't argue. She didn't defend her title. She simply presented her open notebook and her video logging phone. "Stimulus response play," she explained, coolly projecting a short video of the slit of light. "Sound localization, high contrast tracking, light-dark discrimination. Children have the absolute right to say, 'Stop.' No medical equipment, no invasive procedures. Here is the 4-week protocol." Dana Lewis, the CPS official, was more observant. She noticed the meticulousness and the repeated emphasis on the children's comfort. She asked to see the twins. In the playroom, Clara and Elara, seeing the badges, flinched, a reflex born of past harsh examinations. Nia calmed them, asking if they wanted to play one tiny light game. They nodded. Nia repeated the slit-of-curtain trial. The officials watched in silence as the twins' faces, serene and focused, tracked the movement of Nia's shadow across the beam. "Darker," Clara murmured precisely. Freeman scribbled in his pad. His eyes softened, his institutional defense crumbling slightly in the face of such clear, documented observation. Dana spoke gently to the girls. "Does the light hurt when Miss Nia does it?" "No," Elara answered clearly. "When the other doctor used the very bright light, it hurt." The officials left, shaken by the contrast between the professional complaint and the peaceful, data-driven reality. Freeman's parting words were a mixed message. "We don't see immediate harm. What we see is sensory play with documented observation. But Miss Johnson, keep it non-clinical until the official evaluation." It was both an acknowledgement and a final, patronizing warning. The official evaluation came 2 days later at Seattle Children's Hospital, conducted by Dr. Anya Sharma, a highly respected independent pediatric ophthalmologist. Dr. Sharma was a study in professional skepticism, but she honored data. Nia handed over a file thicker and more organized than most patient charts. Dr. Sharma conducted a battery of objective tests: PLR, pupillary light reflex, OKN, optokinetic nystagmus, and VP, visual evoked potentials. These tests measured brain and eye response with soft, non-invasive stimuli. Elias and Nia watched the screens in breathless silence. The results were undeniable. PLR was present. CAN showed a tracking response. VP waveforms, though irregular, were clear. The legal notice from Dr. Finch's firm served as a gauntlet thrown, demanding not compliance but silence. Powerful believed they could halt the children's progress and protect their reputation simply by filing a lawsuit. But Elias Thorne had found his footing. He hired Ava Reynolds, a sharp-witted civil rights attorney known for dismantling institutional arrogance, and her partner, Malik Carter, a litigation specialist who understood how to make digital footprints speak louder than human testimony. The legal strategy was simple. They would not defend Nia's care, they would attack the initial diagnosis. The B-plot, the fight against prejudice and negligence, now took center stage. Ava Reynolds and Nia spent days meticulously building a timeline. Nia's organized logs were cross-referenced with every medical document Elias possessed. Crucial piece of evidence, Nia insisted, was the tiny handwritten light perception LP note in the neonatal chart, a brief acknowledgement that years ago had been intentionally forgotten. "They didn't just misdiagnose," Ava declared, running a finger down the timeline. "They chose to ignore evidence that would have complicated the narrative. Total blindness is simple. Possible LP requires costly follow-up and admits doubt. We aren't suing for money, Mr. Thorne. We're suing for policy correction and for the truth of this systemic failure. The battle wasn't only fought in legal briefs, it exploded into the public sphere. Dr. Finch's team, unable to stop the legal proceedings, leaked carefully crafted stories to sensationalist news outlets. The headlines screamed, "Billionaire's blind twins subjected to unproven home experiments by unlicensed maid." The word maid was used repeatedly, a verbal sledgehammer meant to undermine Nia's competence and diminish her data. Nia faced the attacks with a calm dignity that infuriated the opposition. When a television crew cornered her outside the Thorne gates, she didn't argue her medical knowledge. She looked directly into the lens and spoke a truth that echoed with conviction. "We don't experiment on children. We listen to them. We run gentle, documented sensory play under a hospital plan approved by an independent doctor. Hope isn't cruel when it's measured." She walked away, leaving the reporters with the unsettling contrast between the inflammatory headline and her quiet composure. The true turning point came not from a lawyer but from a conscience. An anonymous email landed in Ava's inbox, subject line, "Internal policy on LP flags." The sender was Olivia Park, a registered nurse who had worked for years at Finch's clinic. Olivia, terrified but driven by guilt, revealed the dark truth. She had witnessed a verbal directive to staff to avoid confusing parents with LP flags and to keep the diagnosis simple, total. She offered to provide screenshots of internal emails and the clinic's electronic medical records, EMR audit logs, the digital record that tracked every single change made to a patient's file. Malik Carter, the litigation specialist, moved like lightning. He secured Olivia Park's safety under whistleblower protection and immediately filed a spoliation letter, legally demanding that Finch's clinic preserve all evidence, especially the audit logs. "Audit logs don't lie," Malik told the team. "They record the user ID, the timestamp, and the deleted text. We'll prove who erased light perception and when." The moment the litigation team confirmed the integrity of Olivia's evidence, the balance of power shifted. Finch's lawyers, realizing their client's negligence was now documented in cold, hard code, pushed for a settlement, a massive payout in exchange for a gag order and a closed case. Elias rejected it instantly. "I won't accept silence. I don't need their money. I need the world to know the truth so no other parent loses 7 years to their arrogance." In the house, the quiet work continued, becoming the emotional counterpoint to the raging legal war. Nanny Petra and even the stern Mrs. Gable began to soften, witnessing the twins' progress. They started incorporating Nia's gentle light schedule into their day. One afternoon, a patch of sun fell on the kitchen floor through the thinned curtains. Clara giggled, stomping her foot in the golden patch. "Sun puddles!" she exclaimed. The house staff, seeing this simple, profound moment of joy, stood still, their own long-held shadows lifting. Later, Mrs. Gable approached Nia, her face flushed with shame, and admitted, "I said people like you the other day. I was wrong. The boys hear everything. I'll learn your schedule." It was a powerful personal victory against prejudice that a lawsuit could never buy. Climax of the conflict arrived at the Supreme Court of the state, where Finch's team petitioned for an emergency injunction to halt Nia's home routines. Courtroom was packed. Finch's lawyer argued that a housemaid had no legal or medical authority. Ava Reynolds was fierce, arguing that Nia was a highly competent caregiver following a physician-prescribed, data-driven plan. The final blow came when Malik presented the latest functional data from the court-appointed special master. The boys' visual response latency was decreasing, and their use of the safe word "stop," a measure of self-advocacy and control, was consistent. Judge Silver, a man who valued evidence over ego, silenced Finch's lawyer when he tried to object to Nia's non-medical background. "Counselor," the judge stated, his voice ringing with authority, "this is a question of competent practice, not pedigree. Titles do not move pupils. Data does." The judge's ruling was a systemic earthquake, injunction denied. Home routines were allowed to continue under Dr. Sharma's supervision, and most critically, the court opened an investigation into Finch's initial diagnostic process and the lack of follow-up on the LP note. The day ended with a quiet victory. Elias formally presented Nia with a new, robust contract, not as a maid but as the coordinator of special development. It was a declaration to the world that caregiving was skilled labor, and that her meticulousness was a priceless asset. Nia accepted, her eyes steady. She knew the fight wasn't over. Finch would counter. But for the first time in 7 years, the light was winning, backed by science, conscience, and the law. The real work, the work of healing the children and the system that had failed them, was finally moving forward. The judge's denial of the injunction and the opening of an official investigation were the sound of the dam cracking. Dr. Alistair Finch's empire, built on decades of professional certainty, began to crumble under the relentless pressure of Nia Washington's objective data and the whistleblower's truth. The battle had escalated into a full civil trial, and this final act would determine not just the fate of Clara and Elara, but the future of pediatric diagnostic protocol itself. Elias Thorne stood beside Nia in the glass-walled office of Ava Reynolds, reviewing the final trial strategy. The media war, though still loud, was losing its grip. Nia had posted a short, simple video, just the sound of Clara's laugh and Elara's voice saying, "Sun puddle," to counter the inflammatory headlines. Contrast between the media's screaming prejudice and the peaceful, verifiable joy of the children was a potent weapon. Courtroom was the arena where truth would finally defeat authority. Finch and his team, sleek in their expensive suits, sat across the aisle, their faces drawn with the kind of fear only the privileged feel when their power is questioned. Ava Reynolds began the plaintiff's case not with an attack, but with a simple timeline. She projected the neonatal chart, highlighting the LP light perception note. Then she projected the EMR audit log, a cold digital ledger showing the timestamp, user ID H. Finch, and the exact line of text deleted, LP to be investigated. "This is not misdiagnosis," Ava said, her voice sharp as a surgical scalpel. "This is a choice. A choice to simplify a complex human life into a total, unchangeable darkness, allowing an entire system to avoid responsibility for follow-up." Malik Carter followed, projecting Nia's meticulously logged data. He showed the jury the video clips of the tiny slit of light, the girls' precise head turns, and the steady improvement in their latency of response. He didn't use medical jargon. He used the language of observation. If they were truly blind, their response would be random. But as these logs show, these children are not random. They are responsive. They are seeing. Tension peaked when Nia took the stand. Finch's lawyer, arrogant and dismissive, tried to dismantle her by focusing solely on her job title. "Miss Washington, is it not true that you hold no medical degree and that your employment status at the time was housekeeper?" Nia looked directly at the jury, her back straight. "I am a Black woman who has worked in care for many years. I do not heal diseases, I listen and I record. I teach children to say, stop. I opened a slit in the curtain and let the science, confirmed by Dr. Sharma and the court-appointed special master, do the rest." The lawyer blurted out, "Do you realize you are only a—" Judge Silver brought his gavel down hard, the sound a thunderclap of rebuke. "Counselor. Enough. The court is interested in data and documented care, not occupational prejudice." The emotional climax arrived with the testimony of Olivia Park, the former clinic nurse. Olivia, trembling but resolved, described the culture of concealment, the verbal directive to not confuse parents, and the fear that kept her silent for years. "I saw too many children flinch under harsh lights," she whispered. "They should have been given gentle light like Miss Washington gives them." The jury, composed not of doctors but of ordinary citizens, deliberated for a shockingly short time. When the verdict was read, the courtroom held its breath. On negligent misdiagnosis, liable. On systemic pattern and practice causing harm, liable. On defamation and prejudice against Nia Washington, liable. Finch slumped in his chair, his arrogance dissolving into the reality of legal defeat. Elias gripped Nia's hand, tears flowing freely, not tears of sorrow for the past, but of pure gratitude for the justice of the present. The remedies were groundbreaking, focusing on systemic change, Massive compensatory damages, mandatory anti-bias training for all staff at Finch's clinic, public apology, and the creation of the Gentle Light Fund, seeded by the defendants to support soft vision stimulation protocols in low-vision clinics nationwide. Weeks later, primetime television aired the court-mandated correction. The on-screen text read, "We apologize to Ms. Nia Washington for unfair coverage and retract the defamatory phrase reckless Maid." Below the screen, Clara and Elara sat on the carpet, crayon in hand. "Dad," Elara said, holding up a drawing of a yellow circle and a few jagged lines, "I want to draw the sun puddles." Clara drew a tiny dot in the corner. "And the kite dot." The girls were enrolled in school with a special education plan, a plan that included a desk near a curtained window and high-contrast paper. Their teacher smiled. "We'll start with gentle light." Clara shyly raised her hand. "I can tell brighter or darker." That weekend, Elias took his daughters to Central Park, the very place he used to stare at from his tower of despair. Nia was there, sitting under a tree, running a new gentle sound game. Elias walked over to her, his voice low, no longer the CEO, just a father. "Nia," he began, "I offered you a job as a coordinator. But you have given us our family back. You have taught us that the greatest strength is to look at the world, not through the lens of what is lost, but through the evidence of what remains." He paused, meeting her eyes. "Please stay with us. Not just as coordinator, but as family." Nia smiled, her steady eyes damp. "I'm here." As the afternoon sun spilled like candy over the grass, Elara ran a short distance, chasing the sun patches. Clara, holding Nia's hand, whispered the safety word, "Stop!" She then laughed and ran on. They had been given light, and with it, the autonomy to control it. Nia opened her notebook one last time. She wrote her final line, small enough only for herself. "Science does not hate black hands. Prejudice does. When science speaks, prejudice shrinks." The mansion on the hill was no longer a fortress of despair. Curtains were thin, allowing light to flow in, paired with the sounds of their favorite jazz. The twins slept, clutching a high-contrast card like a tiny flag. The city, after all its storms, breathed in millions of soft lights, enough for anyone brave enough to open a curtain. The final judgment had been rendered, and the quiet observer had won a victory for every child whose truth had been ignored.